All right. Now, something we probably don't talk about enough on this podcast is retirement, which, according to a 2024 InfoChoice survey, is up there with buying a house, reducing debt, and travel when it comes to the top things Aussies are saving for. Now, most of us are effectively forced to save for our own retirement thanks to the super guarantee, which, as of this month, is now a record high 12%, having gradually risen from the 9.5% it was in 2021. But is that enough to provide us with a comfortable retirement? Or perhaps it's actually too much? Joining us to discuss all this and more is AMP's Director of Retirement, Ben Hillier. G'day, Ben. Welcome to the Savings Tip Jar.
Hey, great to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for joining us, Ben. Before we launch into all of what Dom said at the top there, do you have a savings tip for us?
Savings tip. Look, I've recently bought a couple of extra chickens. I've got backyard chickens. And, with the cost of eggs these days, this is a pretty good way to save money and also good for a nice circular economy from, if you're growing some scraps in the things in the garden, you can feed the chickens for chicken scraps. The scraps from the chickens feed your garden. I bought a cubby house, a kid's cubby house from Marketplace, and that's their very palatial chicken coop. Looks really good in the backyard, and it's good to have them around.
Nice one, Ben. I've got to say that's one of my favourite savings tips I've heard on this podcast so far.
The price of eggs these days.
Just yesterday I paid like nearly $9 for a dozen of eggs, and that was from getting on to the main topic here, which is just retirement and all the things that come with it. Well, I mean, before we talk generally, I guess I just wanted to ask you specifically, with the super guarantee hitting 12% this financial year, kicked in 1st of July. Is that too high, do you think?
Oh, look, it's a good question. For a lot of people, that's actually going to give them a really comfortable retirement, especially if you at the younger end of your career and you're going to have 12% for your whole career, you can likely look forward to a retirement that may even be more comfortable than the standard of living you've got in your working life. There's a broad spectrum of people, right? For people who have interrupted work patterns, mothers, for example, who often take time out of the workforce to raise children, for people who are underemployed, through their working life, or perhaps in lower paid jobs. It may not be enough, and so there's a broad spectrum of people. The most important thing actually is not accumulating enough super. We have a very good system. It's actually I think about the third biggest pension pool in the world. The trick is actually getting people to understand how to safely spend that money without the fear of running out. And if we can get people comfortable to actually consume that capital, spend that superannuation in retirement, that's the key to unlocking real comfort and confidence in retirement.
Yeah, for sure. I like that you segued that for me, Ben, because it's one of the growing topics, I guess, among Australian politics and just society at large. How much do you need for retirement? There's a lot of fear out there around, running out, or having to rely on your kids or the age pension, which isn't exactly great. And that's kind of led us to have this outcome where there's the $3 million super tax, which we'll touch on in a bit, but. Yeah, can you just expand on the sort of fear of running out and sort of what's led to this, even though, the super guarantee is 12% nowadays?
Yeah, look, the fear of running out of money is the number one fear that retirees have, and it's pretty understandable, right? Of course, no one wants to run out of money, and people are they know they're going to lose a little bit of dignity in old age. Unfortunately, our bodies are going to give out in various ways, and that's confronting to people. You're going to be infirm at the very best case scenario. Your legs will get wobbly, and you won't look as good as you used to, and people are worried about that. And it can get worse from there. And so, adding to that the indignity of having to rely on, say, your kids for financial support, that's really confronting for people. And so, as a result, people generally underspend in retirement. Most people in retirement, their super fund will recommend they put their money into what we call an account-based pension. It's basically just an investment account that you can draw on. The government mandates you draw a minimum amount, but other than that, you can draw as much or as little down to that minimum as you like. And so you have these twin risks of you could blow it all too early, and some people do that. But by and large, people underspend from these things because, of course, they don't know how long they're going to live. They don't know what investment returns are going to be, and people are prudent. People are going to be cautious, and so they on average underspend and then pass away with what the government's retirement income review found to be on average about 90% of their starting superannuation balance going to the kids. That's not its intention. It's not why we as a society support significant tax concessions for superannuation. That's to help people live well in retirement, not to not to help their kids have a nice business class holiday when the parents pass on.
Yeah, I suppose that's why there's been some criticisms of the super guarantee being lifted to 12%. If, citing that figure that you said, if so many people are passing away with 90% of their balance at retirement intact, it kind of makes you wonder, well, what's the whole point of this whole super thing? Should we just go the approach they do in New Zealand, where everyone, no matter how much wealth you have, no matter your income, qualifies for a set pension? Is that far more effective than this complicated, convoluted superannuation? I don't know. That's probably a thought bubble for another podcast. But I understand at AMP, you guys have a pretty interesting, unique product that I can't remember whether it's launched or you're launching it soon. But effectively, it helps those manage to keep a part pension retirement, which I understand is quite a common thing. You often see people, writing into Noel Whittaker and saying, "Hey, I've got all this money in my super. How can I still qualify for a pension?" So yeah, just give us a quick run through of this product.
Yeah, so you're right. Having some form of a part pension, an age pension, is really, really important to people. Not necessarily because of the actual amount of money you get, because it can be a fairly modest amount. But you also get the pensioner concession card, which is really, really valuable. And so it gives you discounts on all sorts of things, really cheap pharmaceuticals and healthcare. Discounts on your rates and your public transport and all sorts of things. I think you get boat registration here in Queensland is free. I think for a pension or something like that. Don't quote me, but I'm looking forward to it. So being able to qualify for something is quite valuable and a strong incentive for people. So to encourage people to spend their super better and fund their retirement, the government a few years ago created this new category. They called it at the time innovative retirement income streams. Basically, these are income streams that run out, but they don't necessarily have the same restrictions or limitations as traditional annuities, which were, quite restrictive, had to be invested in conservative investments, and as a result, you typically didn't get great levels of income from these things. Now there's this innovative category allows you to invest in growth assets. It can pay much higher levels of income, and there's more flexibility to the features and benefits of these sorts of things. And so to encourage the take-up of this new category, the government also put in an age pension concession. Basically, the assets, the amount of money you use to buy one of these lifetime income streams, it gets discounted. You could put in, it's a 40% discount. So if you put in, let's call it $1 million, it's not use a nice big round number. If you put in $1 million, the government's only going to see $600,000. Centrelink's only going to see 60% of that value. And so you get this immediate discount. And so that sort of puts people, well back down, maybe a bit from being at the top of their age pension eligibility threshold to way back in the middle, and maybe you get half a pension, and also that pension concession card. What we've done at AMP is taken the benefits that the government's provided here and expanded it even further, because the government's allowed for you to purchase these solutions before retirement. Now, the great benefit is, if you do this before retirement, you're not locked in. There's no penalties. You can change your mind. You're not actually committing to a lifetime income stream when you retire. But that discount just grows and grows the longer you're in it. Because as long as you're earning basically more than inflation in your superannuation account, the amount that the Centrelink sees is only growing by inflation, but your actual balance is growing even further. And so, you could have at retirement quite a substantial amount that's got a significant concession for Centrelink assessment for the assets test. It's quite common for us to see modelling, on a young person, 30, 40, for example, a decade or two or three, even from retirement, they could easily be getting $100,000 or more in an extra age pension. So it's a very powerful thing. And what we've done at AMP just simply rolled that out as a feature, as a standard feature on the super fund.
Yeah, for sure. There's something pretty juicy in there, and I think it's something for people to try and wrap their head around. And maybe if they're, taking a look into their super and their financial planning, is to speak to a financial planner, because that's one of the key topics I find myself, trying to explain is among older people, in-laws, my own parents. Is how can I retire and have a big super balance and still retain the age pension? It's one of the biggest topics. For younger people, it's actually novated leases. So that's, and we've touched on that in previous episodes. So,
that was,
very timely.
If you weren't going to, if I wasn't going to talk about chickens, I was actually going to mention novated leases. So, and about electric vehicles.
That's a nice savings tip as well.
Indeed, the electric vehicle exemption is pretty powerful.
Yeah, we've had a novated lease savings tip before. I quite like the old chicken one. That's very very unique among all our guests. Back on the super train though, how does this sort of interact with the sort of forthcoming $3 million super tax? Because it's a pretty big concern. There's been a lot of media on it. A lot of people don't like it. What's AMP's general take on it, and how does that interact with the products you have on offer?
Oh, look, I think in general AMP is supportive of having a fair system, and I don't think you'll get any arguments from AMP or broadly most commentators that someone was call it 100 million, call it 20 million, call it 10 million, etc. should be getting such generous concessions on tax that are available through superannuation. I personally, and maybe my personal views, how about that? Personally, I 100% agree with the legislative purpose of super being to provide a dignified retirement, and therefore money that's in excess of that in superannuation, money that's more than you need for a dignified retirement, well, it doesn't really have a purpose. And so I don't have a problem with people paying a fair share of tax. However, we have raised some concerns about just the construct of the cap and how it's taxing unrealised gains. It sort of seems to break some long-standing sound principles about how taxation works. You can have double taxation or even triple taxation, is my understanding. That because for franked dividends, it represents tax already paid, but that can be part of the paper gain, and so you can be paying tax on that amount. And then if you have a loss, you don't necessarily get to reclaim that back, and so it does break some I think sound principles. So we have called for perhaps some refinement about how that tax is calculated. And I think it's good. There's some ongoing conversations in the media about some alternate proposals. We'd certainly support some more dialogue to just make sure we get it right. And then the other one is about the indexation, of course. Look, a typical person starting out in the workforce today is going to have more than $3 million of super just through wage rises and inflation. Sounds like a massive number, but it's actually by then, in 30 or 40 years' time, that's actually not that big a deal. And we're looking at $20 million houses and all that sort of thing by then. And so, I don't think we realistically expect there'll be no indexation over that level over that period of time. But nonetheless, I think it's best to start on the right footing, from the beginning, as opposed to wait for a future government to have the difficulty of trying to explain why they're helping rich people by increasing a cap. You know what I mean? That a government in the future is going to get criticised for making that $3 million cap, a $4 million cap, or a $5 million cap, because it'll just be seen as benefiting people at the top end. And I'd rather we get it right from the start.
Yeah, certainly that's the real question about this whole thing, is whether or not it will be indexed. I mean, you are a bit suspicious of the government initially, when you see that they're not indexing it. You think, why don't you just index it? Like it just makes sense. It makes it easy. It goes up with inflation. Then there's not this criticism of like, oh, well, it's going to hit the average person as opposed to the very top end. But I guess that's the other sort of criticism of super as a whole. I mentioned the inheritance scheme. Is it also just a tax avoidance scheme? That's kind of the other thing you often hear about. But no, it should be, the primary purpose should be for providing for a comfortable retirement for the majority of Australians. Just a quick last one. I know we've run very over time, Ben, but a lot of people think that you need to save have $1 million in your super to have a comfortable retirement. Is this true?
Not at all. Not at all. Look, like I was saying before, the greatest increase we can get to living standards in retirement is just getting people comfortable with the idea that super is there to be spent. Now, no one wants to see their balance run down to zero and then be living another 10 years beyond that. And so as part of any retirement plan, we should be considering both a lifetime income source, sits on top of the age pension. It basically gives you, maybe to cover your living expenses from the age pension and the lifetime income stream. That just covers your living expenses no matter how long you live. That, think about your energy, your groceries, all those sorts of stuff. You've got just a locked-in baseline standard of living no matter how long you live. And then you use an account-based pension alongside that for your lifestyle expenses. That's for your travel, for your eating out and all that sort of stuff. We know, of course, that's going to slow down the older you get. So that doesn't need to last forever. But between three sources of income, the age pension as well, that gives people the confidence their income's never going to run out. And as a result, you can do on a lot less than you think. And it's hard to use numbers because the numbers we use only apply to today's retirees, of course, and most people listening are not going to be right at the point of retirement. But for currently, you could have a couple who could have a little bit less than even $400,000 in super plus a family home, and they can have a comfortable standard of living with that amount of savings. Obviously, the numbers get bigger the younger you are because of inflation, but of course you've got more time for your balance to grow. So yeah, look, I certainly have a message that people should be more comfortable than they expect. They should be more confident, than they expect. You certainly don't need as much as you think you do to be comfortable in retirement.
That's a great way to end this segment, Ben. Retirement, it's a big prickly issue. People don't like thinking about it and thinking about, the X day that they may keel over and pass away. As always, thanks for sharing your thoughts with us on the Savings Tip Jar podcast on this pretty pertinent issue at the moment.
Great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks so much, Ben. Cheers.